major effect of mass formation at the level of individual mental functioning is, and that's extremely important, that's maybe the most important one, is that it makes people radically intolerant for dissonant voices. So everyone who doesn't go along with the narrative, who doesn't buy into the narrative where the masses believe in, is considered an enemy and is considered someone who should be stigmatized, who should be discriminated, and who should be, in the end, eliminated.
Can you give us a quick summary of the term mass formation? Where did it come from, and how does it work?
Oh yes, I can. Mass formation refers to a phenomenon that has been studied by scholars throughout the last 2 centuries, I think. The first one who became really famous with a study on this phenomenon. They didn't always use the term mass formation. It was sometimes referred to as crowd formation. Different terms were used, but they all referred to the same phenomenon. They all referred to the emergence of a very specific kind of group formation in society, which has a very specific effect at the level of individual psychological functioning. And more specific, this mass formation makes individuals completely incapable of taking a critical distance of what the group believes in. That means that if the group believes in a narrative that is utterly absurd in many respects, it seems as if the people who are in the grip of the mass formation can't take a critical distance anymore, even when it concerns extremely intelligent people. That's so strange about mass formation. Intelligence doesn't protect you against it. It is even the case that how higher the level of education, the more vulnerable you become for mass formation. So, that's the first characteristic, the first strange effect mass formation has at the level of individual mental functioning. And then the second one is that people who are in the grip of mass formation in a strange way become willing to radically self-sacrifice. It is as if they are not aware anymore of all the individual of all the things that were important to them before the mass formation. They want to sacrifice everything, their wealth, their health, the future of their children, even their own lives. And then the third major effect of mass formation at the level of individual mental functioning is, and that's extremely important, that's maybe the most important one, is that it makes people radically intolerant for dissonant voices. So everyone who doesn't go along with the narrative, who doesn't buy into the narrative where the masses believe in, is considered an enemy and is considered someone who should be stigmatized, who should be discriminated, and who should be, in the end, eliminated. And this can take really absurd proportions, like in the major mass formations of recent history, or at least in the major mass formations of the 19th century, it turned out time and time again that children report their parents to the state if they do not follow the narrative, the mainstream narrative, and the other way around, that parents report their children to the state, even when it means that they will die. So there is this famous example that was reported to me by Sharif Eshtari, a woman who lived in Iran during the revolution in Iran of 1978. And she belonged to the upper class of Iran, and as such she was forced to witness certain trials in which traitors were sentenced. And she witnessed how a mother who had reported her son to the state hung the noose around the neck of her son, and when he was on the scaffold. And when he died, she claimed to be a heroine for what she did. So that's one of the most striking examples of how intolerant people come towards each and everyone who doesn't follow the narrative the masses believe in. And it happens time and time again in every long-lasting major mass formation. So, phenomenon of mass formation just refers to this. It refers to a very strange kind of group formation, which leads to very specific effects at the level of individual mental functioning. And in my book, I describe how this mechanism exactly works. It has this very specific. Initially, it seems as if it's something incomprehensible. How can people start to behave like that? How can they start to believe, for instance, as happened in Iran, that the portrait of their leader is printed on the surface of the moon? Even intelligent people started to believe that the portrait of the Ayatollah was printed on the surface of the moon. How can intelligent people start to believe such absurd things? How can they start to report their own children and so on? Seems absurd, but once you understand the basic psychological mechanism, then you really understand why this happens. And I think in this, in our era now, it's extremely important, I think, to understand it, because I believe that we see it happening again now. And I believe that just like in the 20th century, it could lead again to the emergence of a new kind of totalitarian state. In the Soviet Union, a mass formation led to the emergence of the communist totalitarian state. In Nazi Germany, it led to the emergence of Nazi Germany, of Nazism. And now, I think the kind of mass formation we are in now could lead to the emergence of a technocratic totalitarian state. The better we understand what happens, the better we will realize what we should do against it and what we shouldn't do. It will, as we understand the mechanisms, the psychological mechanisms involved in mass formation, we will understand what strategy we can follow and what position we should take towards this emerging mass formation. So, again, it's extremely important because everything depends on how the people who are not really fully in the grip of the mass formation, what they do and how they react to it.
And you mentioned the Soviet Union and that child in Iran who was hung by his own mother. And there was a very similar case, Pavlik Morozov. Have you ever heard of? He informed on his parents, and his grandparents killed him in revenge. And then he was made into a sort of saint of the state. There was statues all over of this child, Pavlik Morozov, who was a hero of the people, so to speak. And they would bring school children out to worship this statue. So again, that idea of divisions within families, informing on family members, and then the state actually took that as the ideal child. In February 2020, a mass formation developed very, very rapidly. And within a month, you had a state of fear, a state of paralysis, of lockdown, and a willingness of people to turn on their neighbours, to turn on their own family members. And we even see the legacy of that, of families that are broken up because of it. And we saw all of those things that you describe happen very, very rapidly over a period of 2 years about. As we look back on that, and I see that some people want to forget, some people are willing to admit that there was mistakes made, that people had bad information and that they took actions which were unwarranted and unjustified, but they want to leave that behind them and forget about it. Is that the right thing to do?
Oh, not at all, I think. Not at all. We have to look back. And we have to discuss what happened. We have to consider the narrative that seized control of society then. Because the strangest thing now is that time and every day it becomes clearer and clearer that the narrative was wrong and that the critical, the skeptical voices in many respects were right. And still, people refuse to see that. It's very striking. Even the clearer it becomes that the narrative was wrong, the more repressive and in many respects the more aggressive the people are treated who once warned us that the narrative was wrong. That strikes me time and time again, that nobody of the proponents of the people who represented the mainstream narrative, nobody of them actually want to admit that how absurd it was in many respects. And I think that just shows actually that we are still in a mass formation. It shows that people continue to buy into the narrative. That's what happens now. So they still identify with this narrative. And that means also, among many other things, that this narrative can be reactivated at any moment. If the WHO declares a new medical emergency situation, and due to the new pandemic treaty of the WHO, they will be capable of doing so, declaring a medical emergency situation and imposing all kinds of measures to react to that medical emergency situation to the nation states. So that means that if people continue to believe now that what happened, that the measures during the corona crisis, that society reacted in the right way, why wouldn't they react in the same way when there is a new so-called medical emergency situation? I think if we don't want to react in the same, in my opinion at least, dramatic way, then we will have to discuss the narrative. We will have to talk with each other, have conversations with each other. The proponents, the people who identified with the mainstream narrative, and those who are skeptical about it, should sit around the table and talk with each other, and in an open conversation. That would be the real remedy for the disease of this society. But at the moment, that doesn't happen. And to be clear, I think during the corona crisis, there was more than one absurd narrative that emerged in our society. On the one hand, we had the corona narrative, which was in many respects utterly absurd, but there were also on the other side, on the skeptical side, on the critical side, there were many absurd narratives, much too extreme conspiracy theories, who also were absurd and who also led to a mass formation, smaller than the dominant one, but it were also mass formation. So I think it's time now for our society to sit around the table, or at least to try to open up to the people with a different story, and to all try to look at what we did, what we believed in ourselves, and to admit that maybe we also have gone too extreme throughout the crisis. It's just extremely important, I think, that we all try to do so, that we all really try to speak out in as sincere way as possible, both about what we think about the mainstream narrative, and also about the narratives we ourselves started to believe in during the corona crisis. Sincere speech, in all honesty, as open as possible, starting from the courage to be vulnerable and to articulate something that might make us vulnerable, is key, I think, in this situation, because that's exactly what mass formation makes impossible. It forces people to speak in the same way, to comply, to conform to the mainstream narrative, to try to prevent that different opinions are articulated. So the remedy for this problem is always to do the opposite, to continue to speak out as sincerely and as honestly as possible. That's both the remedy for the mass formation itself, because dissonant voices, if they speak in a sincere and respectful and honest way, always disturb the mass formation, which is always a kind of group hypnosis, a kind of mass hypnosis. And hypnosis is always induced by the voice of a leader. And if there are people who articulate a different voice, then they will disturb the mass hypnosis and the mass formation. So that's what we need. And so it's both truth speech, sincere speech is both the remedy for the symptom, and it also tackles the root cause of the symptom, namely, and that's something that I didn't mention yet now. It also is a solution to the root cause of the symptom of the mass formation, which always is the loneliness and disconnectedness in our society. Major mass formations can not emerge in a society in which people feel really connected. They only emerge when many people feel isolated, disconnected from their environment. It's under these conditions that usually triggered by propaganda, suddenly all these disconnected and lonely individuals merge again, fuse again, connect again and form a mass, which is a very specific type of group, as I said. Yeah.
Is this like a psychological swarm? I think of some insects, grasshoppers, on their own, they're quite individualist. They're quite.
Or starlings, yes, yeah.
But when they get together, it seems to alter their very behaviour. It seems to alter. There's the enzymes in it which bring out a completely different swarming behaviour. There's something I wanted to. There's something you've mentioned there, and about where responsibility lies, and about conspiracy theories. How much of this is down to the individuals? Is down to individuals acting across a social level? There's an American-Iranian social scientist, Mark Kangizi, and he tries to address this topic on where does the authoritarian impulse come from? Does it come from above, or does it come from across society? Where do you think it lies? Is it on an individual level interacting in this sort of subconscious id, or does it come from top down?
Both. Like it's clear that what happened in society during the corona crisis, on the one hand, was imposed top down by the large global institutions such as the WHO, who for decades now have been trying to determine how nation states should react to so-called pandemics or medical emergency situations, and they considered lockdowns and stuff for a long time already. So and it's clear that to a certain extent, of course, the entire policy and the entire reaction of society to the corona crisis was imposed top down. Everybody can see it. Everybody who wants to consult the websites of these global institutions will see it with his own eyes. I don't think there can be a different conclusion than that. But at the same time, I think I doubt whether this top-down reaction really had the structure of a conspiracy. Maybe in certain respects it had, because conspiracies have always existed and they will always exist, and there always will be probably a certain dimension of conspiracy in every major societal phenomenon. But I think the impact is smaller than people expect. I think that's also something that's extremely important. These global institutions use propaganda, that's what they do, to convince the population or to make the population consent with their ideological plans and with the ideological changes they want to realize in society. But this propaganda can never be efficacious if the population is not willing to accept it. That's something extremely important. Something in the population should be susceptible to this propaganda. And that's, I think, the most important thing. What made the population so susceptible to this propaganda? That's a question we should really ask ourselves, because the point of gravity in a totalitarian system, and again, I think we really are at risk of a new totalitarianism, which will be led by the global institutions and which will be democratic in nature, maybe even transhumanist in nature. So we are at risk of this new totalitarianism, but we should always realize that the point of gravity of a totalitarian system is not in the elite, it is in the masses. The major problem is, why does a major part of the population prove so susceptible to this propaganda? That's the major question we have to ask ourselves. And then, that's something that I explained at great length in my book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism. Then we'll find out, I think, in the end, that what made people susceptible to propaganda is their loneliness, their disconnectedness, as I mentioned already a few minutes ago. And this loneliness, in its turn, is the consequence, I think, of the dominant view on man and the world now. We consider the universe and the human being as a kind of a mechanical entity, a machine, which can be completely and that's the most important thing about that view on man in the world, which can be completely understood, manipulated and controlled in a rational way. So our dominant view on man in the world is rationalist in nature. And it's this rationalist view which directly and indirectly leads to, or is responsible for the fact that more and more people feel lonely throughout the last 2 centuries. And once people feel lonely, they start to experience a lack of meaning making, and they are confronted with more and more freely floating anxiety, frustration and aggression. And that is a state in which people are enormously susceptible, enormously vulnerable to propaganda. It's in this stage, if a narrative is distributed through the mass media, which indicates an object of anxiety and a strategy to deal with that object of anxiety, all this free-floating anxiety is connected to the object of anxiety and the narrative, and people start to be willing to participate in the strategy to deal with the object of anxiety, even if the strategy is completely absurd. That's what happens time and time again during the witch hunts, during the Crusades, in the Soviet Union, and in Nazi Germany, and Iran, and so on, during the French Revolution, and so on, and during the Corona crisis, I think. So we should really start from a profound analysis of the problem, and then we will realize that the real enemy, and that's crucial, I think, is not the elite. The real enemy is this view on man in the world, this delusional belief that through rational understanding we will be capable of controlling life, of manipulating life. That's the real enemy. It's this view on man in the world that makes people, that isolates people from life around them. And as long as we don't find a solution, as long as we do not transcend this view on man in the world, we will never get rid of totalitarianism and mass formation, never. If we would destroy the elite, we would find out that in the short run it is replaced by a new elite, which in the end is exactly the same. It's, as Solzhenitsyn said, in the end, unethical and wrong to concentrate all evil in one small group of people. It's not true. Evil is everywhere, in everyone's heart, and we should start to tackle it in our own heart. And the first way in which we can do it, and that's what all the workshops I gave this year were about, we should practice the art of sincere speech. It's the sincere speech, as I mentioned already, is a sincere speech that will purify us, that will connect us to the other again, and that will make all this propaganda and all this mass formation not necessary anymore.
What you're describing there is sort of man as a machine without spirit. And you say this is a problem we've had over 2 centuries, although some of the mass formations you refer to go back beyond that. Is this, and the past 2 centuries are also heralded as sort of the age of enlightenment, the age of modernism. Is this a problem that comes out of this idea of enlightenment and modernism?
To a certain extent it does, yes, to a certain extent. I think the Enlightenment, on the one hand, represented an attempt to rationalize the world, and I think that's good. I think we should be as rational as possible. But the strange thing is that science, which represents this practice that tries to understand the world in a rational way, that science itself actually showed us much clearer than ever before that the essence of life cannot be understood in a rational way. That's exactly what science showed us. All seminal scientists concluded exactly this, that in the end, you can never understand the essence of the objects that are studied, never. And well, people like Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, Max Planck, Einstein, all concluded this. In the end, the essence of life transcends all rational understanding. Complex dynamical systems theory showed us in a marvelous way that the essence of all complex and dynamical systems in nature, which is almost all phenomena in nature, behaves like an irrational number in mathematics. So, And then the strange thing is that most people continue to believe deeper and more determined than ever before that rationality will be the solution to everything. And it's exactly the opposite. As long as we try to reduce life around us to the categories of our own rational understanding, we inevitably will destroy life. Inevitably. Because the essence of life is irrational. And that means that we also, as soon as we do the opposite, as soon as we start to become aware and or humble enough to admit that our rational understanding will always fall short to understand the miracle and the mystery of life around us, as soon as we do that, we literally will be capable to open up a little bit. And I see this in a very concrete way. If you try to understand in a logical, rational way, then you connect the one logical idea to the other. And you try to make the system as strict as possible, meaning that you literally build a kind of a logical wall, a rational wall around you, which without noticing it, isolates you from life around you. And as soon as you do the opposite, as soon as you can start to admit and realize that your rational understanding will never be capable of grasping life around you, the building blocks of that rational wall slide away a little bit from each other, and the eternal music of life can penetrate the logical wall and touch the strings of your own being, your own soul and body. And that's the moment in which you start to feel connected again, not only with the people around you, but with nature around you. That's what connects you again. That's what makes you resonate again. That's what makes you aware that there is something eternal outside of you, of which you are part. And that's also, in the end, what takes away, to a certain extent, all the fear of death and dying again. And that's exactly what is the major problem, I think, psychological problem, of one of the major psychological problems of our society, of our culture now, that in a certain way, while we reduce life to a dead biochemical process, we cling to it, and we are so scared of losing it that we in the end take the most absurd measures to try to live a little bit longer. But as long as you are not capable of dying, you're also incapable of living. That's the point.
And that brings up, I think you mentioned earlier, transhumanism, and this is, I think, an attempt to avoid that encounter with the void. You mentioned some great minds, some superb intellects who came to this conclusion that they worked in the rational realm, but they came to the conclusion that life isn't rational. That, I guess you might say, they embraced that beautiful madness. You mentioned Einstein, Bohr, Planck. You didn't mention any philosophers there. If I were to ask you, and I of course referenced Nietzsche there with that to stare into the void, and I think this terror of death that you talk about, people clinging on to life, acknowledging that life is just a chemical process of decay, but still trying to cling on to as much of it as they can. And there's a terror of the finality of that void, of nothingness. And people have this, this terror and aversion of what will be in that void. But if I were to ask you, what philosophers brought us this new rationalist view, which discounts the humanity of this machine that we call mankind?
What philosopher brought us this view?
Yeah.
I think L'homme machine of de la Métrie. I don't know if you know him. I wouldn't call him a philosopher actually, because in my opinion he was, at the epistemological level, much too naive to be called a philosopher. But I think he thought of himself that he was a philosopher.
What's his
so
name again?
I will mention him. De la Métrie, L'homme machine. It's one of the most man-machine. Man is a machine. It's one of the most fanatic believers in the mechanist view on man and the world. But I think in the end, I don't think that there were many famous philosophers who in the end believed that life could be understood in a rational way. I actually don't think so.
So even, say, Kant?
Kant, I don't know. I don't think so, no. Kant realized that language and the way in which our mental system is built inevitably always involves that implies that we always lack rational understanding to grip everything. Like he, as far as I know, in his practical reason, his critique of practical reason, he mentions that human beings think the mental representations that human beings use to think have a very specific characteristic. The one representation, a representation never refers immediately to the object it tries to. It never refers immediately to an object, and that's what animal signs, the sign systems animal use, do. One sign refers to one phenomenon, one object. This cry refers to fear. This cry refers to the fact that another animal has found food, or this crime refers to, this sign refers to, well, sexual excitement, and so on and so on. So each sign, no matter how complex animal sign systems are, the signs always refer in a one-to-one relationship to objects, or to phenomena. And that's a difference with the human mental system. Kant says that in the human mental system, the mental representations do not refer immediately to an object, they refer to other mental representations. And that means each representation refers to another mental representation, and it means that you always lack one mental representation to determine the meaning of all mental representations. You could compare it to language. If we use a word, then the meaning of that word, this word does not refer immediately to an object. To determine what a word means, you need another word. You need to define it by other words. But these other words also need a definition, which also uses words. So you always lack one word.
There's infinite
to fix the meaning of all the words. And that makes that, in the end, no matter how long we try to rationally understand and to rationally understand the world around us, we never succeed. And that's why a human being, we always think that animals distinguish themselves from human beings distinguish themselves from animals because they know much more. But that's not true. The most important difference between a human being and an animal is that a human being, in contrast to an animal, the subjective experience of a human being constantly circles around something it doesn't know, something that escapes rational understanding. You will never see an animal sitting on a bank thinking about what the meaning of its life is. If another animal loves it, if it means something to another animal, what will happen after it dies? No. Only a human being is constantly confronted with these questions to which there is no definitive answer. And that's a consequence of the mental system of a human being. And so that's exactly why the structure of our language, the language we use to think, makes that we can never be sure, that we will always lack rational understanding, that the essence of life will always transcend our rational understanding.
Amazing. I suppose the other great philosophers that I would reference with the arrival of new ideas like this would be Hegel. Is he partly responsible for this rationalist reduction of man to this sort of machine?
I don't think so.
Right.
Hegel had this idea that one day the dialectical processes would lead to an absolute knowledge, I think. But I doubt whether he was so naive to think that it would be a kind of a rational knowledge. I don't know. I don't think so. No. Because there are different ways of knowing.
Yeah.
Not all knowledge is rational in nature.
Back to the pandemic and what happened there, in particular how that narrative was manipulated and such. How has this changed society? And how has it changed people's mentality, people's psychology, and society in general?
No, it definitely had a huge impact, of course. And I think we cannot see this pandemic and the societal response to it as an isolated event. It was part of a tendency which was already manifesting throughout the last 200 years. A tendency which, It was part of a tendency towards a technocratic society, I think, and it was a huge leap forward towards towards the manifestation of this technocratic society, and definitely, of course, it changed society in a very, very profound way. I really believe that the most important thing is that we start to become aware of the tendency it was part of, which means like, well, as soon as you see the human being and the universe as a kind of a machine, as I just said, the logical consequence is that this machine should be led by a rational expert, a technocratic expert, of course. Why would you ask a politician who has no rational knowledge about something to lead society if you consider society to be like a complex machine? I know. It's logical within this view of man in the world that an expert who has a maximal rational knowledge about what happens in society should lead society. And that's what we are facing now. The corona crisis was a huge step forward towards the replacement of democracy by a technocratic state. And the better and the sooner we become aware of that, we become aware of the root cause of these problems, of the basic nature of what happened, the more we will get rid of it.
What can people do personally, and as people's influences, as organizational level? What steps should people be taking personally and across society? What steps should people take?
That's an important question, and I can give a very concrete answer. People have to practice the art of good speech. They have to continue to speak out. They have to continue to speak out in a sincere and honest way, respectfully, not trying to convince the other, just articulating their own most honest and sincere opinion about things. That's the first and most important thing. And they should realize that it doesn't matter where you speak out. I am speaking out here now in an interview. I did it at Tucker Carlson's for millions and millions of Americans. But that's not what is the most important thing. A sincere word spoken at a kitchen table to one person can and will have an impact on the entire system of society. That's exactly what complex dynamical systems theory showed us. All complex dynamical systems and also the psychological processes in society or a complex dynamical systems, all complex dynamical systems have this wonderful characteristic, this wonderful quality, which is referred to as sensitivity to initial conditions in complex dynamical systems, which boils down to the following, that a minor change in a small detail of the system, like for instance, a minor change in the vibration of one water molecule in a pot of boiling water in the convection will have an impact on the entire architecture of the convection patterns in the pot of water. So, in exactly the same way, if you have a minor positive impact in society on one individual, this will have an impact on the entire system. So someone who speaks out at the kitchen table, in a shop, somewhere on the street, in a sincere and honest way, will have an impact on the entire system. We all have the capacity in ourselves to change the world through sincere speech. That's the most important thing. As soon as we realize that, we should realize that we have this enormous responsibility, each and every one of us, to try to live up to that first and foremost ethical duty of the human being, to articulate the words that seem sincere and honest. And if we do that, we will, no matter how few of us there are, but we will just prove more powerful than even the most sophisticated and the most, the largest propaganda machinery in human history. The truth in the end will prove more powerful But we shouldn't be naive when talking and thinking about the truth. We should never think that we are the only ones who possess the truth. We should never think that we possess the truth, because if you think that you possess the truth, you already lost it. Truth is something that is always outside of ourselves, with which we can sometimes resonate a little bit, feel it a little bit, and it is at that moment that we have to have the courage to articulate it. And that's what will make the difference.
The title of this event was Think Local, and I've heard Think Local, Act Local. And what you're suggesting there is have the influence on those close to you, and maybe that will radiate out.
Exactly. Think local, act local, speak local, and so on is crucial now. That's a problem. To act local, to think local, to buy your food local, to produce your food and distribute it in a local. That's one of the things that reconnects us to each other. That's one major. I think Marx was right in this respect. Mass production of the objects we need to survive alienates us, estranges us from each other, because like most social bonds were established through the exchange of the simple objects we needed to live, and now this drops away. Now we don't know the people anymore that produced the stuff that we need. We don't know them anymore. It's maybe most of the things we use here now are produced somewhere in China, and we will never know the person who did the job. And that's exactly the moment of the human satisfaction. When you make something, when you produce something, and you hand it over to the person who will use it, and you see the happiness or you see the emotion on the other's face. That's the moment in where we feel connected. That's the moment in which a social bond is established, and that's the moment also where life starts to feel meaningful. So we have to go, I really think at that level, we don't have to go back to how it was, but that's something that we should take with us, and to the new society we all need now. Our society is in a crisis, and there will be no superficial solution. It's a profound crisis. It's a fundamental crisis. We are in the middle of what Michel Houellebecq called the metaphysical revolution, and we all have to go through it. And I'm sure that in the new society, there will be much more local exchange at all levels, local exchange of products and objects, but also local exchange of words, because now we have conversations with people around the world through our social media and through all kinds of technological devices, but this exchange is completely different than an exchange of two people who are locally, who meet each other in person. It's completely different. The exchange of information is possible through technological means, but what is impossible is the kind of resonance that exists when people meet in person and speak to each other in person. When they do so, the bodies of the people resonate with each other, and people are really connected in a way that they are not aware of, but they resonate with each other, they vibrate together, they feel connected to each other, and that's what they experience without knowing it at the satisfaction of the most profound and deepest need of the human being, this resonance with the other human being. And is that what is destroyed through the technological connection? So, speak locally.
Thank you very much, Mattias. It's been a pleasure talking to you here.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak out here.